Dr. Jessica Iron Brooks stood at the edge of Olympic Stadium, her heart pounding against her ribcage as she watched 12 massive ships descend through Earth's atmosphere. The vessels moved with impossible grace for their size, their crystalline hulls refracting the afternoon sunlight into prismatic displays that drew gasps from the assembled crowd of athletes and officials. "Quite the entrance, wouldn't you say?" she muttered to General Richards, who stood rigid beside her. The weathered military man merely grunted, his eyes fixed on the approaching ships. As a xenobiologist and former Marine, Jessica had been preparing for this moment for months. The Galactic Federation's announcement of Earth's evaluation had sent the scientific community into a frenzy, but no one had expected them to arrive during the World Athletics Championship. The lead ship touched down with barely a whisper, its landing struts extending like liquid mercury. A delegation of aliens emerged, led by what could only be the Krixtar ambassador, nearly 9 feet tall, with iridescent scales and musculature that made Olympic weightlifters look like children. Dr. Brooks, the ambassador's translator device, produced perfect English, though his 4 eyes narrowed in what seemed like disappointment. "We expected more." Jessica straightened her spine, refusing to be intimidated. "Ambassador, with all due respect, you haven't seen anything yet." The delegation followed her into the stadium, their sophisticated scanning devices hovering around them like mechanical insects. The opening ceremony was in full swing, with athletes from every nation demonstrating their skills in an elaborate display of human physical prowess. "Primitive," one of the alien scientists muttered, loud enough for Jessica to hear. "Their movements are inefficient, their bodies unmodified. How did they even achieve spaceflight?" Before Jessica could respond, one of their scanning devices erupted in a shower of sparks. The alien scientist rushed to check the readings, mandibles clicking in agitation. "Impossible. The energy output from their muscle tissue exceeds our baseline models by 300%. A malfunction," the ambassador dismissed. "Humans are barely past their stone age compared to." His words were cut short by screams from above. One of the stadium's massive support beams had begun to crack, weakened by the electromagnetic interference from the alien scanning equipment. Thousands of spectators sat directly beneath it. Jessica didn't hesitate. She sprinted toward the nearest maintenance access, her military training kicking in. "Ambassador, your people's strength. We need it now." The Krixtar delegation moved with impressive speed, following her up the maintenance ladder. When they reached the failing beam, Jessica had already begun coordinating with stadium staff through her earpiece, directing emergency crews and calculating load distributions. "The beam's integrity is at 20%, an alien engineer reported. Even our combined strength can't." Jessica grabbed a length of steel cable, her muscles burning as she helped secure a temporary support. "Then we adapt. That's what humans do." What followed was a desperate race against time. Jessica directed the aliens and human emergency crews in an improvised plan that combined Federation technology with human ingenuity. The ambassador himself worked alongside her, his superior strength complemented by her quick thinking and practical experience. When the last support was secured and the danger passed, Jessica noticed the alien scanning devices had never stopped recording. The readings now displayed on their holographic screens told a story very different from their initial dismissal. "Your bodies," the alien scientist said, mandibles twitching in what might have been excitement. "They adapted to the crisis in real time. Muscle density increased, neural pathways optimized, stress hormones converted to enhanced performance, all without genetic engineering." The ambassador studied Jessica with all 4 eyes. "Perhaps," he said slowly, "we should conduct a more thorough investigation of human capabilities." "You are not what we expected." Jessica allowed herself a small smile. "Ambassador, you'll find that humans are rarely what anyone expects. This is just the beginning." The aliens exchanged glances, their earlier condescension replaced by something that looked remarkably like scientific curiosity. Phase 1 of humanity's evaluation was about to begin, And Jessica Ironbrooks was ready to show the galaxy exactly what primitive humans could do. The Krikstar ambassador's environment suit whirred in protest as another wave of heat rolled across Death Valley. At 130 degrees Fahrenheit, even the Federation's advanced technology struggled against Earth's most punishing terrain. Yet there, half a mile ahead, Mike Desert Ghost Callahan ran with nothing more than shorts and a hydration pack. "Impossible," muttered Chief Medical Observer Zextai, her sensor arrays buzzing frantically around the human runner. His core temperature should have reached critical failure 2 hours ago. Jessica Brooks stood nearby under a shade canopy, monitoring the Badwater Ultramarathon's progress. Mike's been running for 16 hours straight. He's not even halfway done. The alien delegation had chosen this event specifically because it seemed suicidal. A 135-mile race through the hottest place on Earth, with an elevation gain of 14,600 feet. When they'd first heard about it, they'd assumed it was propaganda. "We have detected no cybernetic enhancements," Zextai announced, clearly frustrated. "No genetic modifications, not even basic thermal regulation implants." "How is he?" She stopped mid-sentence, staring at her readings. "This cannot be correct." Mike had just crested a hill, his sun-bronzed skin glistening with sweat. The sensors showed his body actively adapting to the extreme conditions, his very cells seemingly learning from the stress. "Their bodies become stronger through deliberate damage," the ambassador said, disbelief evident in his translated voice. "It defies evolutionary logic." The drama heightened as they reached mile marker 72. Another runner, Sarah Martinez, had collapsed from heat exhaustion. The medical team moved to intervene, but before they could reach her, Mike had already stopped. "He's sacrificing his position," one of the alien observers noted. "Irrational behavior." They watched as Mike helped Sarah to her feet, sharing his water and electrolytes. The Federation's sensors recorded everything. Two humans, supporting each other through conditions that should have been lethal, their bodies somehow growing stronger through mutual suffering. "What drives them?" the ambassador asked Jessica. "There is no prize worth this torment." Jessica smiled, wiping sweat from her brow. "You're asking the wrong question, Ambassador. It's not about what we get from this. It's about what we become." The aliens' confusion deepened when their instruments detected elevated levels of endorphins and other neurochemicals in both runners. "They are experiencing pleasure." Zextay's translator couldn't quite capture her incredulity. "Runner's high," Jessica explained. "Our bodies reward us for pushing our limits. Evolution's way of encouraging exploration and endurance." As the day wore on, more Federation observers arrived, drawn by the increasingly bizarre readings. Humans weren't just surviving the extreme conditions, they were actively adapting to them. Each mile seemed to bring new revelations about human physiology. Mike finally approached mile 90, where the real challenge began. The climb to Whitney Portal would take runners from below sea level to over 8,300 feet. The ambassador's suit automatically adjusted for the altitude change, yet Mike's only concession to the thinning air was a slightly slower pace. "Your species," the ambassador said quietly to Jessica, "you seek out these challenges, voluntarily." "We create them," she corrected. "There's an ultramarathon somewhere on Earth almost every weekend. Death Valley, Arctic Circle, high-altitude trails in the Himalayas. If it seems impossible, someone's probably turned it into a race." The Federation's medical team was now in complete disarray. Their models for species advancement centered around eliminating physical stress through technology and genetic engineering. The idea of intentionally seeking out hardship as a path to improvement contradicted everything they believed about evolutionary progress. As the sun set and Mike Desert Ghost Callahan pressed on through the gathering darkness, Jessica noticed the ambassador had stopped checking his environmental readings. He stood silent, all four eyes fixed on the distant runner, watching a display of human endurance that no amount of advanced technology could fully explain. "Perhaps," he said finally, We should reconsider our definition of advancement. The Marathon mystery was far from solved, but it had cracked the Federation's certainty about their own superiority. As Mike disappeared into the desert night, Jessica wondered what other human feats would shatter their preconceptions. The pressure at 400 feet below sea level made the Federation's submersible creak ominously. Valsha, the young alien scientist, watched in astonishment as Ashley, Deep Blue Reynolds, descended past them with nothing but a wetsuit and monofin. "She's been down for 4 minutes already," Jessica informed the delegation through their communication system. "And this is just her warm-up dive." The aliens' sophisticated equipment struggled to make sense of what they were seeing. Ashley's heart rate had dropped to levels that should indicate near death, yet her brain activity showed perfect awareness. Even more baffling, she seemed completely at peace. "The human body cannot withstand such pressures," protested Dr. Koldrix, the Federation's leading physiologist. "Their skeletal structure shoaled." His voice cut off as Ashley kicked gracefully past their viewing window, descending even deeper. Valsha's instruments sparked with activity. Her blood vessels are adapting. Oxygen distribution is shifting in ways our models didn't predict possible without technological assistance. The delegation had chosen to observe freediving after their Death Valley revelation, believing no species could naturally adapt to such extreme pressure changes. They hadn't expected to find humans deliberately training themselves to override basic survival instincts. At 6 minutes, Ashley reached her target depth of 500 feet. The aliens watched in stunned silence as she hung suspended in the azure depths, her body completely relaxed despite conditions that should have crushed her. "This defies everything we know about conscious control of autonomic functions," Valsha whispered, her recording devices capturing every moment. "She's literally telling her body to ignore its own death." The situation suddenly turned critical when a support cable from the alien submersible snapped, sending a piece of equipment plummeting toward Ashley. The Federation observers froze, their technology useless to help. But Ashley had already noticed. With fluid grace, she adjusted her position, letting the debris pass harmlessly by. Then, instead of surfacing, she dove deeper to inspect the submersible for damage. "Impossible," Dr. Koldrix breathed. "The nitrogen levels in her blood alone shoaled." "She's trained her body to process nitrogen differently," Jessica interrupted. "Something about the human spleen's ability to store oxygen-rich blood. Ashley discovered it by accident during her early training." At 8 minutes, Ashley began her ascent. The alien's instruments recorded something unprecedented. Her body was shifting through multiple physiological states, adapting to each pressure change as naturally as walking upstairs. "This isn't just adaptation," Valsha announced suddenly, her voice trembling with excitement. "This is active evolution. Their bodies don't just endure extreme conditions, they learn from them. Each dive rewrites their biological responses." When Ashley finally surfaced, she showed no signs of distress. She simply removed her nose clip, flashed a thumbs up to the support boat, and asked when she could attempt her next dive. The Federation's medical team swarmed her as soon as she boarded, their scanners whirring frantically. Ashley submitted to their examination with amused patience, even as their equipment repeatedly malfunctioned trying to explain her vital signs. "Your species willingly suppresses its own drowning reflex," the lead medical officer stated, bewildered. "You learn to ignore millions of years of evolution. For sport." Ashley wrung water from her long dark hair. "Not ignore. Understand. The human body is capable of amazing things if you learn to trust it. Most people never discover their true potential because they're too afraid to find their limits." Valsha, who had been quiet for several minutes, suddenly spoke up. What if this is the next stage of evolution? Not the elimination of biological limits through technology, but the expansion of natural capabilities through understanding and trust. The senior Federation officials bristled at such heretical thinking, but they couldn't deny the evidence in front of them. A primitive human had just demonstrated mastery over basic biological functions that their most advanced genetic engineering couldn't replicate. As Ashley prepared for her next dive, Jessica noticed the alien delegation huddled in intense discussion. Their worldview was cracking, one human feat at a time, and they hadn't even seen what humans could do in the cold yet. Tyler "Tank" Morrison's muscles rippled under the stadium lights as he approached the loaded barbell. At 1,105 pounds, it was a weight the Federation's strength assessment algorithms had deemed impossible for an unaugmented human to lift. "His skeletal density is barely above human standard," muttered Dr. Coleridge, frantically recalibrating his sensors. "By our calculations, his bones should shatter under half this load." The Krikstar ambassador shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His species was renowned throughout the galaxy for their natural strength, yet he'd watched this human spend the last hour lifting weights that would challenge their strongest warriors. "What's even more fascinating," Jessica explained, "is that Tyler was significantly weaker just 6 months ago. Humans don't just lift weights, they deliberately tear their muscle fibers to grow stronger." The Federation observers had gathered in force for this demonstration. After the revelations of human endurance and adaptability, they demanded to see humanity's raw power potential. Tyler had been chosen not because he was the strongest human, but because he was still actively improving. "Beginning attempt," Tyler's voice boomed through the arena. The crowd fell silent. The alien's instruments recorded everything as Tyler positioned himself under the bar. His heart rate elevated systematically, breathing patterns shifted, and somehow, impossibly, his muscle density increased before their eyes. "He's accessing his body's emergency reserves," Valshi observed excitedly, "but doing it consciously." Tyler's roar echoed through the stadium as he lifted the massive weight. The Federation's sensors nearly overloaded trying to analyze the cascade of biological adaptations happening in real time. Bones reinforcing themselves, muscle fibers recruiting in perfect sequence, even his cellular energy production optimizing on the fly. Suddenly, a sharp crack rang out. One of the barbell's reinforced ends had developed a structural flaw. The weight began to shift dangerously to one side. The alien delegation rose in alarm, their protective instincts triggering. But before anyone could react, Tyler had already compensated. In a display of raw power and perfect control, he stabilized the imbalanced weight and completed the lift. The stadium erupted in cheers, but the Federation observers were focused on their readings. The moment of crisis had pushed Tyler's body beyond their theoretical models for human capability. "Did you see that neural pattern?" Valsha whispered to Jessica. "His body adapted to the imbalance faster than our best combat eye could have calculated a response." The Krikstar ambassador had been unusually quiet. Now he stood, his massive frame casting a shadow over the platform. "I wish to attempt this lift," he announced. A hush fell over the crowd. The ambassador's species possessed roughly twice the natural strength of humans. By all physical metrics, this should have been an easy demonstration of Federation superiority. Tyler respectfully cleared the platform. The ambassador positioned himself, his environmentally enhanced muscles tensing. The bar bent slightly as he lifted, and then stopped, barely reaching his knees. "Impossible," the ambassador grunted, his translator struggling with his strained voice. "Our strength metrics clearly show." "Strength isn't just about muscles," Tyler interjected kindly. "It's about teaching your body to push past what it thinks is possible. Every time we lift, we're not just moving weight, we're challenging our limits." The ambassador carefully lowered the weight, his previous confidence visibly shaken. "You deliberately seek failure," he stated, trying to understand. "To find your breaking point." "No," Tyler corrected, chalk dust floating around him like a warrior's battle powder. "We seek the point just beyond what we think will break us. That's where growth happens." Jessica watched the Federation scientists poring over their data, their neat categories of species capability crumbling. Humans weren't just strong. They were systematically teaching themselves to be stronger through controlled failure and adaptation. As Tyler prepared for another attempt at an even heavier weight, the ambassador turned to Jessica. "Perhaps," he said slowly, "the Federation's understanding of breaking points requires revision." The day's demonstration was far from over, but already the aliens were beginning to understand. Human strength wasn't just about power. It was about the endless pursuit of impossibility. Jack Frost Wilson sat cross-legged in the snow wearing nothing but shorts, his breath creating steady clouds in the -40-degree air. Around him, the Federation's most sophisticated temperature monitoring equipment sparked and reset, unable to reconcile his body's readings with their understanding of human physiology. 3 hours, Jessica announced to the shivering delegation, their environmental suits working overtime against the Arctic cold, and his core temperature has barely dropped. The aliens had chosen northern Alaska for this test, confident that extreme cold would finally reveal the limits of human adaptation. Instead, they watched in growing disbelief as Jack calmly controlled his body's response to conditions that should have killed him hours ago. "The metabolic readings make no sense," Dr. Kohlrich muttered, tapping his malfunctioning scanner. "He's generating heat through some form of conscious control, but our instruments can't determine the mechanism." Jack opened his eyes, ice crystals forming in his beard. "Your machines can't measure it because you're looking for the wrong things. This isn't about fighting the cold. It's about embracing it." Valsha, who'd been quietly collecting data, suddenly straightened. "The human's brown fat tissue. It's activating in patterns I've never seen before. And look at these neural pathways." The Federation observers clustered around her readings. Somehow, through meditation and breathing techniques, Jack was consciously activating biological processes that should have been purely automatic. Their discussion was interrupted by an urgent alert. A Federation research team, investigating ice formations 2 miles north, had lost power to their environmental systems. In these temperatures, even their advanced biology couldn't survive long without protection. "Rescue vessels are 20 minutes out," the ambassador reported grimly. "They won't survive that long." Jack was already moving, pulling on a light jacket, not for warmth, but to carry supplies. "Show me where," he commanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone intimate with Arctic survival. "This is madness," Dr. Kohlrich protested. "No unprotected biological entity can." "Doctor," Jessica interrupted, "while you're explaining why it's impossible, Jack will be saving lives." They watched as Jack set out across the frozen landscape at a steady run, his body seeming to radiate its own heat signature. The aliens' instruments tracked him, recording how his metabolism adjusted to maintain optimal temperature even as he exerted himself. "The cold should be sapping his energy," Valsha observed, fascinated. "Instead, he's using it as a fuel source. His mitochondria are operating at efficiencies our genetic engineering hasn't achieved." When Jack reached the stranded research team, the aliens witnessed something even more remarkable. He began teaching the freezing researchers basic breathing techniques, helping them activate their own latent thermal regulation abilities. "Impossible," the ambassador whispered as his people's vital signs stabilized. "He's teaching them to override their biological programming." In minutes. By the time the rescue vessels arrived, the Federation researchers were not only alive but showing signs of acute biological adaptation. Their bodies had begun mimicking the thermal regulation patterns Jack had demonstrated. Back at the base camp, the Federation's medical team swarmed around Jack as he calmly sipped hot tea. Their questions tumbled over each other. "How did you redirect blood flow so precisely? What meditation technique activated the brown fat response? How did you teach others so quickly?" Jack's answer stunned them into silence. "I didn't do anything special. Every human has this capability. Most just never have a reason to wake it up." The implications hit the Federation observers like a polar wind. Humans hadn't just adapted to cold, they had developed the ability to teach that adaptation to other species in real time. Valsha's voice shook with excitement as she reviewed the final data. "This goes beyond simple survival or adaptation. They've learned to consciously control what our most advanced biotechnology can barely influence. As another blizzard rolled in, Jessica noticed the ambassador staring thoughtfully at his environmental suit controls. The Federation's technological solutions to extreme environments suddenly seemed clumsy compared to humanity's elegant biological mastery. The cold had revealed an uncomfortable truth. Perhaps true advancement meant working with nature's challenges, not trying to engineer them away. Emma Skywalker Martinez stood at base camp on K2, studying the massive alien vessel embedded in the mountain's death zone above 26,000 feet. The Federation's distress beacon pulsed weakly through the howling wind, its red glow barely visible through the snow. "Our rescue shuttles can't maintain stability in these winds," the ambassador reported, his environmental suit struggling with the altitude. "And our ground teams." He gestured to several Krixtar warriors who were already showing signs of severe altitude sickness despite their advanced equipment. "Then we do it the human way," Emma said, checking her minimal gear. No supplemental oxygen, just decades of experience and her body's trained adaptation to thin air. The Federation observers watched in disbelief as she packed a light bag with rescue essentials. "This is suicide," Dr. Kohlrichs protested. "The atmospheric pressure alone at that altitude is exactly what we trained for," Emma interrupted. She turned to Jessica, who was coordinating with other climbers via satellite phone. "How many volunteers?" "6 experienced climbers already en route. They'll meet you at Camp 2. Valsha's sensors hummed as they recorded Emma's preparation. "Her blood is already changing," the young scientist noted with fascination. "Increased red blood cell production, enhanced oxygen utilization. She's adapting before even starting the climb." The ambassador, despite his earlier skepticism, requested to join the rescue mission. Emma assessed him with experienced eyes. "Your strength could be useful, but you'll need to follow our lead. The mountain doesn't care about Federation technology." As they began their ascent, the aliens witnessed a masterclass in human adaptation. Emma's team moved with precise efficiency, their bodies performing complex calculations of oxygen debt and energy conservation that the Federation's best computers struggle to model. At 24,000 feet, the ambassador's environmental suit malfunctioned. Emma immediately recognized the signs of high-altitude cerebral edema in his deteriorating condition. Without hesitation, she shared her emergency oxygen supply, a decision that should have doomed them both. "She's deliberately stressing her adaptation response," Valsha observed through chattering mandibles. "Her cells are literally learning from the additional oxygen deprivation." The final approach to the crashed vessel became a lesson in human ingenuity. With the ambassador partially recovered but weakened, Emma's team improvised a rescue system using minimal equipment. The Federation observers watched in awe as humans operated at the edge of biological possibility, their bodies constantly adapting to conditions that should have been fatal. "Look at their teamwork," Valsha noted excitedly. "They're not just surviving individually, they're creating microenvironments of survival through cooperative effort." When they finally reached the crashed ship, they found its crew alive but terrified. The Federation's advanced life support had protected them, but they were trapped in a failing vessel at an altitude their species had never evolved to endure. Emma's voice crackled over the radio. "We're not just getting them out. We're teaching them how to get down alive." What followed was an unprecedented fusion of human expertise and alien physiology. Emma and her team demonstrated breathing techniques, movement patterns, and mental strategies that helped the rescued crew work with the altitude instead of fighting it. "Their bodies," Valsha whispered in amazement, "they're mimicking the humans' adaptation patterns, just like with the cold training, but at a cellular level." The descent became its own challenge, with Emma sharing her oxygen supply between the ambassador and the weakest crew members. Her own body somehow grew stronger through the sacrifice, demonstrating adaptation rates that broke Federation models. Back at base camp, as medical teams treated the survivors, Jessica noticed the ambassador staring up at K2's peak with all 4 eyes. "Your species," he said finally, You could have developed technology to make such climbs easier. Instead, you chose to adapt yourselves. Emma, checking her team's condition despite her own exhaustion, smiled. The hardest mountains teach us the most important lessons, Ambassador. Sometimes the path of greatest resistance is the path of greatest growth. The Federation's rescue mission had failed, but humanity had succeeded, not through superior technology, but through the willingness to push beyond perceived limitations and help others do the same. Marcus, the adaptable Thompson, circled his opponent in the Federation's combat arena, his bare feet silent on the polished floor. Across from him, a Krixtar warrior named Vexthor moved with fluid grace, his enhanced muscles rippling beneath ceremonial combat armor. "This is not a fair demonstration," the ambassador protested from the observation deck. "Vexthor is our finest combat specialist, with over 30 years of genetic optimization." Jessica watched Marcus's relaxed stance, remembering his words during the pre-fight briefing. "The problem with optimization is it creates predictability." The match began explosively. Vexthor launched a blindingly fast combination of strikes that, according to Federation combat computers, should have ended the fight instantly. Instead, Marcus seemed to flow around the attacks like water. "Impossible," Dr. Kohlrich muttered, checking his readings. "The human's reaction time is actually improving during combat. His neural pathways are evolving." Valsh's sensors captured everything. Marcus's body adapting in real time, his fighting style shifting to counter Vexthor's superior strength and speed. Where the alien's movements were precisely calculated, Marcus's seemed almost improvised. "He's not following any recognized combat pattern," one of the Federation's military analysts noted with frustration. "Our prediction algorithms can't." The analyst's words cut off as Marcus suddenly switched styles mid-exchange, transitioning from defensive evasion to an aggressive grappling approach that caught Vexthor completely off guard. "Fascinating," Valsha breathed. "He's not just adapting his techniques, his entire body is reconfiguring its movement patterns. Look at these muscle recruitment sequences." The fight became a demonstration of human adaptability versus engineered perfection. Every time Vexthor's combat programming identified a pattern in Marcus's fighting style, the human would seamlessly shift to something entirely different. "This isn't just trained skill," Jessica explained to the bewildered observers. "Marcus studies everything from Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu to Muay Thai to traditional wrestling. Humans don't just master one way of fighting. We blend them, create new ones." The turning point came when Vexthor, frustrated by his inability to land a decisive blow, violated tournament protocol and activated his genetic combat enhancements. His strength and speed doubled instantly. Instead of retreating, Marcus smiled. What followed left the Federation observers in stunned silence. Marcus used Vexthor's enhanced strength against him, turning every powerful strike into an opportunity for a counter. The human's techniques seemed to evolve with each exchange, his body learning and adapting faster than Vexthor's combat computer could update its strategies. His adrenal response, Valsha noted excitedly. "It's not just triggering fight or flight reactions. He's consciously directing his body's stress responses to enhance specific attributes as needed." The end came suddenly. Marcus fainted with a technique he used earlier. But just as Vexthor's combat programming predicted and countered it, the human transitioned into a completely new movement. The alien warrior, for all his genetic optimization, found himself flying through the air, his perfect balance turned against him. The impact of Vexthor hitting the mat echoed through the arena. Marcus immediately helped him up, showing respect that contradicted the Federation's understanding of combat psychology. "Your species," Vexthor said through his translator, "you do not fight like your muscles are designed for. You fight like water finding new paths." Marcus wiped sweat from his brow. "The human body isn't designed for any single way of fighting. That's our strength. We adapt, we learn, we combine. Every limitation becomes an opportunity to innovate." The Federation's combat analysts were in chaos, their models shattered by what they'd witnessed. A human, using nothing but natural adaptation and creative innovation, had defeated their most advanced combat engineering. Perhaps, the ambassador said thoughtfully, we have been approaching combat evolution backward. Our focus on optimization has led to predictability. As Marcus demonstrated some basic techniques to an eager group of alien warriors, Jessica noticed Valsha frantically analyzing the combat data. This changes everything, the young scientist whispered. Their adaptability isn't just physical. It's a complete paradigm shift in how evolution can work. The combat paradigm had revealed perhaps the most important truth yet. True advancement didn't come from becoming perfect at one thing, but from the endless capacity to become something new. The Federation Council chamber hummed with tension as Dr. Jessica Ironbrooks took the central platform. Thousands of alien representatives from across the galaxy watched, their various environmental suits creating a shimmer of artificial atmospheres throughout the vast space. Distinguished council members, Jessica began, her voice steady. You came to Earth expecting to find a primitive species in need of uplift. Instead, you found something that challenges everything you believe about evolution itself. The chamber's holographic displays activated, showing footage from the past weeks. Mike Callahan running through Death Valley's inferno, Ashley Reynolds communing with the ocean's depths, Tyler Morrison defying physical limits, Jack Wilson mastering the cold, Emma Martinez conquering the death zone, and Marcus Thompson rewriting combat itself. Your genetic engineering seeks perfection, Jessica continued. But perfection, by definition, cannot improve. Humanity chose a different path. We chose adaptability. Valsha stepped forward, her youth forgotten in the gravity of the moment. The data is undeniable, she announced, bringing up complex biological models. Humans don't just adapt to survive, they adapt to thrive. Each challenge they overcome rewrites their cellular memory, creating new potential for future adaptation. The Krixtar ambassador, now one of humanity's strongest advocates, raised his massive frame. I have witnessed their strength firsthand. But more importantly, I have witnessed their ability to teach that strength to others, even to us. Murmurs rippled through the chamber as Valsha displayed footage of Federation species learning human techniques, alien researchers practicing cold adaptation, warriors studying fluid combat styles, scientists exploring consciousness-directed biological control. We thought we were advancing by eliminating environmental pressures, Valsha explained. But humans show us that pressure creates possibility. Their primitive state is actually the pinnacle of evolutionary potential. Dr. Coleridge, despite his initial skepticism, now stood in support. Their bodies possess adaptation mechanisms our most advanced engineering cannot replicate. Not because we lack the technology, but because we never imagined biology could work this way. Jessica's next words silenced the chamber. Humanity doesn't need uplift. We need partners willing to remember what their own species might have been before technology made them comfortable. The council erupted in debate. Some argued that humanity's unpredictability made them dangerous. Others saw the potential for a revolutionary new understanding of species advancement. The Supreme Counselor raised all 6 hands for silence. Dr. Brooks, your species has demonstrated remarkable capabilities. But what guarantees can you offer about humanity's future development? Jessica smiled. With respect, Counselor, guarantees are what prevented your civilization from discovering these possibilities in the first place. Humanity offers something better than certainty. We offer infinite potential. She gestured to the gathered evidence of human achievement. Every limit we've encountered, we've transformed into a stepping stone. Every barrier has become a teacher. We don't need genetic engineering to advance. We need challenges worthy of our adaptation. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. Humanity hadn't just proved themselves worthy of Federation membership. They'd demonstrated an entirely new path of species development. There is a human saying, the ambassador added, his translator conveying unexpected emotion. A smooth sea never made a skilled sailor. Perhaps the Federation has been calm waters for too long. The Supreme Councilor's decision resonated through the chamber. Humanity will not be admitted to the Federation as a developing species. Before disappointment could set in, he continued, they will be admitted as teachers. As celebrations erupted across Earth, Jessica found Valsha analyzing one final data set. What do you see? She asked the young scientist. Hope, Valsha replied. Your species hasn't reached its biological limits. You haven't even discovered them all yet. And now, she gestured to the chamber full of representatives already clamoring to learn human adaptation techniques. Neither will we. The Primal Summit had revealed an essential truth. Humanity's greatest strength wasn't in their current capabilities, but in their endless capacity to develop new ones. They had shown the galaxy that true evolution wasn't about reaching perfection. It was about maintaining the ability to become something new. As Earth celebrated its unprecedented position in the galactic community, Jessica couldn't help but wonder, what impossible thing would humans adapt to next?